The United States and the United Kingdom just signed a trade deal, and it's a complete disaster for the British economy. The British economy has been stagnating for the last 18 years. The cost of living is out of hands, and millionaires living the United Kingdom in unprecedented level, and the British economy is already suffering. And this trade deal is a complete humiliation for the entire United Kingdom, and it's going to send the UK into a complete disaster. Maybe it will stagnate for another 18 years. So here in this video, I want to explain why this trade deal is a complete disaster for the British economy, what exactly this trade deal is, and how it will impact the entire British economy. If you're ready, give this video a thumbs up and let's get right into it. If you look at the trading partners of the United States, you see a problem with the European Union, Asian countries, Mexico, and of course China. But there is no problem with the United Kingdom because the United Kingdom buys from the United States as much as it sells to the United States. So there is literally no any kind of trade deficit between the UK and the US. Maybe some years there is a small tiny trade deficit, but it's absolutely nothing and it's absolutely normal between the two countries. So if you want to solve your trade deficit, you clearly solve it with Canada, Mexico, China, but not with the United Kingdom that has been doing it fairly with the United States. And the data on that is very clear. Last year, the United Kingdom exported to the United States around $60 billion worth of goods. On the other side, they imported from the United States around $57 billion worth of goods. So there is a trade deficit of around $2 billion. And $2 billion is, frankly speaking, is nothing because we're talking about hundreds of billions of dollars. Sometimes the United States buys from the UK a bit more. Other years, the UK buys from the United States a bit more. So that number fluctuates year by year, and that's absolutely normal. When there is a consistent trade deficit of hundreds of billions of dollars, such as the case with China, I see a problem over here, but not here. Basically, what happened, you can say that Donald Trump created a problem out of thin air that did not exist at all, put the British economy in a very vulnerable situation, and then signed with them a trade deal that is very bad for the British economy. There is no other explanation. Now, some people might say that, well, the UK sells to the US much more services than the US sells to the UK. And that is absolutely true. If you look at the numbers, in 2023, the UK exported $118 billion worth of services to the United States. On the other side, they imported around $54 billion. I got you. I told you there must be something. But you know what? If you've been listening very carefully to Donald Trump, he made it clear. He's not talking about services. His entire argument about the trade deficit that the United States has with the rest of the world is about physical products and not services. And if you listen to him, he talked about that consistently. Because if you actually take a look at the services, then the entire argument that Donald Trump is making makes absolutely no sense. Last year, the United States exported around $1 trillion worth of services. However, it imported around $750 billion worth of services. So the United States is actually running a huge surplus when it comes to services. So there is no any kind of deficit. And that's why you never heard Donald Trump talking about the surplus that the United States has with the rest of the world when it comes to services. The entire British economy is based on services, and there isn't much things that the United Kingdom is physically producing. That's why they're more focused on exporting services, just like the United States is focused on services. But because the United States is much bigger than the United Kingdom, it got a population that is like 5-7 times bigger than the United Kingdom. It is physically and geographically much bigger. They can produce cars. The United States can produce a lot of things, while the United Kingdom cannot afford that, especially in this age when we have competition from China and Southeast Asia, where they can manufacture those things at a fraction of the price. So I would assume that this was not part of the negotiation with the United States, but I guess they used it against the United Kingdom. They said that maybe if you guys talk too much and you don't sign this agreement that is favorable to the United States, then we're going to impose tariffs on the British services, and that would have actually pushed a lot of British banks, a lot of British insurance companies and auditing companies into a complete disaster. So what exactly is this deal that the UK and the US signed? Now, first of all, the 10% tariffs on all British goods are staying. Those tariffs are not going away. So there is a 10% baseline tariff that the United States imposed, and it's not going anywhere. And the United Kingdom is going to pay that 10% tariff if it exports anything to the United States. So part of me does not understand what exactly has happened. There was no trade imbalance between the two countries, and yet the United Kingdom still has to pay the 10% tariff. Is that fair to the United Kingdom? Well, absolutely not. But anybody cares? Nobody actually cares about that. But will the United States pay a 10% tariff by exporting their products to the United Kingdom? Absolutely not. Who do you think this deal is benefiting? Exactly, the United States. But that's just part of the deal, because if you look at the rest of the deal, you will be shocked how bad this deal is for the United Kingdom and how good this deal is for the United States. The only good news is that they brought the tariffs on cars to around 10% on 100,000 cars that will be exported from the United Kingdom into the United States. So first of all, there was a 2.5% tariff before Trump took in office. Trump raised that tariff to 27.5%, and then in the negotiations, he brought it down to 10%. Isn't that genius? That is a complete disaster for the entire auto industry for the United Kingdom, because now those Range Rovers, those Jaguars will be taxed at least 10%, and there is a quota of 100,000 cars. So if the United Kingdom will import or export more than 100,000 cars to the United States, guess what? They will pay a 27.5% tariff on every single car that will enter the United States. That's an absolute disaster. And how many cars did the UK export to the United States? Something around 140,000 cars. So the first 100,000 cars will be taxed at 10%. The other 40,000 cars will be taxed at around 27.5%. And that limits the entire auto industry of the UK, because if they start producing much more cars, they will have to increase their prices by at least 27.5%, which means that they will not do that, or they will come up with a completely different strategy. And that strategy could be, why not simply move manufacturing outside the United Kingdom to the United States? At least for the cars that we will be selling in the United States. First of all, we can produce as many cars as we want. That's the first advantage they have. Secondly, we will also avoid the 10% tariff that everybody has to pay, including the United Kingdom. So don't be surprised if Jaguar and Range Rover will shift manufacturing, and that means that jobs will go out of the United Kingdom. That means that economic activity gets out of the United Kingdom, and that means economic stagnation for the United Kingdom. And that also means that less taxes will be flowing to the British budget. Here is the best part of this deal: no tariffs on steel and aluminium. Suppose the United Kingdom will produce steel and aluminium, and they can export it to the United States at 0% tariff. This is supposed to be the golden crown of this deal for the United Kingdom. But let's ask a different question. How much steel and aluminium does the United Kingdom produces? Well, not much. The entire steel and aluminium industry of the United Kingdom is collapsing, and it's barely surviving. But guess what? This zero tariff rate between the two countries applies to both countries. Now, the United States right now has the capacity to boost its steel and aluminium industry, which means that they will start selling massively steel and aluminium to the United Kingdom. And that means that the UK will depend on the United States for steel and aluminium, and the US steel and aluminium companies will pay 0% in tariff by exporting that to the United Kingdom. Do you think the United Kingdom will solve its problem with the steel and aluminium industry? Well, absolutely not, because they have much bigger problems than the steel and aluminium industry. So the steel and aluminium industry in the UK is going to entirely disappear over the next 3 to 5 years. It was already almost non-existing, and now it will simply disappear, and the United Kingdom will just more depend on the United States. It's a huge win for the United States. 0% on Boeing parts, and that is pretty much one of the interesting part of this deal. So there are two major corporations that produce commercial planes literally for the entire world. We have Boeing in the United States, and we have Airbus in the European Union. And most of the airlines in the European Union rely on Airbus, because most of the European countries spend billions of dollars building that Airbus company, and that includes the United Kingdom as well. But the Boeing in the United States relies on Rolls-Royce engines from the United Kingdom to produce their planes, which means that without the Rolls-Royce engines, Boeing cannot possibly produce their planes. And that should be a bargaining power or a bargaining chip in the hand of the UK to pressure the United States to sign a deal that should be favorable to the United States or to the United Kingdom. But guess what happened? They said that you can import or you can export your Rolls-Royce engines to the United States at 0% tariff. Why? Because Boeing cannot produce their cars without those engines in the first place, and that's why they put a 0% tariff. But if you want to do that, you still have to buy $10 billion worth of Boeing planes. So we cannot produce those planes without you, but if you want us to also exempt them and give you a 0% tariff on those engines, then you gotta buy $10 billion worth of Boeing planes instead of Airbus, where you literally spend billions of dollars developing that company. Is that a fair deal for the UK? The last part of this deal is that the UK will buy around $5 billion worth of agricultural products from the United States. There are different safety and food standards between the United Kingdom and the United States. The standards in the UK are very close to the European Union, but very far from the United States. Now, if the United Kingdom is going to buy so much agricultural products from the United States, then they have to change the food standards. And that means that they will move away from much safer standards of the European Union, and they will start importing a lot of agricultural products from the United States. Again, that is going to be a massive hit for British farmers. So what do we have at the end of the day? The United States will sell $5 billion worth of products to the United Kingdom. They will raise around $6 billion worth of revenue from tariffs, because there is still going to be a 10% tariff on the United Kingdom. And the UK tariffs overall on average will be lowered down from 5.1% to 1.8%, and the United States raised the tariffs from 3.4% to 10%. It's a small win for the United States because the United Kingdom is not even a major trading partner for the United States. The major trading partners are the European Union, China, Vietnam, Japan. These are the countries and not the United Kingdom. But it's a complete disaster for the UK because it is going to have serious implication. If this trade deal did not happen, if there was not any kind of trade war between the UK and the United States, the US would be fine. It wouldn't affect the US economy at all. But now with this trade deal, it is going to have a serious implication on the UK economy. But here is where things get really, really bad. The United Kingdom signed this trade deal because it is very desperate. They wouldn't have signed this trade deal with the United States. Trade would have stopped between the two countries, and the United Kingdom cannot afford that, which means that they signed this deal in a very desperate situation that is very bad for the British economy. Businesses cannot possibly plan their strategies and business models if they don't know how much they're going to pay at the end of the day. You want to make a profit. You want to know how much margins you're going to make. If you do this business and you will end up with a loss at the end of the day, why would you do this business in the first place? And that's why it's important to have some kind of clarity, and you do your math, you do your calculations. And without those calculations and certainty, there is no way for you to do business. The European Union on the other side is not rushing at all because they know that we have so much leverage over the United States. We are not the UK. The UK economy is like what, $3 trillion GDP? The European economy is like $20 trillion GDP, maybe $19 trillion, maybe $22 trillion. So they're going to be very tough. They're not simply going to accept any kind of deal, even if it's going to damage the European Union. They will stand there, they will negotiate tough, and if it actually requires for them to wait until Trump is going to get out of office, they will do that. But Trump cannot possibly wait because he has elections to win in mid or the end of 2026, which means that he is going to sign some kind of a deal with the European Union, and that deal with the European Union is going to be far better than with the United Kingdom, which means that a lot of businesses in the UK will see that, wait a second, if we move our business, for example, to the European Union, we can take advantage out of this trade deal and sell in the United States, which means that businesses over time are going to move out of the UK either to the United States or to the European Union. Let me give you an example. So there is a quota of 100,000 cars that will be taxed at 10% when they enter the United States. So for Range Rover to move their company from Britain to the European Union and become an EU company and sell their cars in the United States, if that is going to give them a tax advantage or a tariff advantage, they will do that. And this is just the beginning. Just imagine how many problems Brexit brought to the United Kingdom. If it wasn't for Brexit, the United Kingdom today would be part of the EU and they would have had a much stronger negotiation power against the United States, and they wouldn't have signed this horrible bad deal with the United States. But I guess when you have no other option and you're completely desperate, you're going to do that. But my assumption is that they simply signed this deal with the United States right now in order to prevent the trade from stopping. Once Trump is out of office, they might try to renegotiate this deal and sign something much more favorable to the United Kingdom, or at least fair to the UK. Because at this point, I guess the UK should become part of the United States and just avoid the 10% tariff. Instead of Canada, I guess the UK should become like the 51st state of the United States. After 18 years of stagnation, the British economy just started growing slowly. But I guess this growth is going to stop, and the GDP growth, or the real GDP growth, is going to stagnate for at least a couple of years, which is why you should stop relying on the government and you should start taking care of yourself, because nobody is going to take care of you unless you do that yourself. And the best way to actually protect yourself and grow your wealth through these turbulent times is to start investing and build an investing portfolio that is going to provide you with the freedom that you deserve. And if you want the best investing strategy for you, then there is a link in the description of this video that will help you out with that. That's it for today. Thanks for watching, and I will see you in the next one.